IT perspective, which has been helped by the pandemic, is that we're now looking at around about 80% of people self-serve when they're accessing the help desk, which is really good and is a positive sort of movement. From a CSC perspective, I think Kevin previously reported that there are some challenges around at the minute with retaining staff. We've tried to address those with a number of issues. We've embraced the agile working situation, and that's working well. So we've got people working at home, working hybrid, and working in the office, which has helped with retention. But also we've recently done a pay review for all the staff, increasing the pay for a number of staff with a view to reflect the current market conditions and also trying to retain people. The initial part of the year is usually challenging from a performance perspective and a volumes perspective, so it's good to see that the KPIs in the CSC have all been reported as met. Moving on to transactional services, we had an unusual year this year because the pay award was late. So usually the pay award for local government is around about July, August time. It didn't actually come in until February this year, which obviously is 6 months after. So that provided some challenges for the payroll team, but I'm glad to say that they stepped up to it. There were some late nights involved, but they actually managed to get the payroll run and resolved in time for the necessary deadlines. We've been working closely with council colleagues around business world and resolving some data cleansing issues and things like that to enable the project to proceed as planned. And probably most importantly, that the team has had another successful year end. So as you know, end of March is one of the busiest times around. So from an accounts payable, accounts receivable and payroll perspective, we completed the year end quite successfully. So that's all quite positive. I think we're looking forward to some of the challenges that are coming down the road. And we've obviously got the business world project to continuing. We've got some carers recommissioning coming in later this year. We're looking at telephony upgrades and potentially a new telephony system, and contributing towards some of the council's plans around digital delivery, which again is quite an exciting programme to be involved with, and will hopefully lead to increasing people's access to services. And we're also engaged with the council at the moment in initial discussions around some support that we can potentially provide for adult social care. That's a very brief summary. If anybody's got any questions, happy to sort of take them.
Yeah, decent report, thank you. Questions? Anybody want to raise? I mean, this is one regular reviews of the Serco contract. Of late, it's been because it is much better than it was in the first days. So it's almost business as usual. Is there anybody that wants to make any comment at all? No? Okay, so if we just go back to the recommendation, the board is invited to seek assurance about the performance of the corporate support services contract. I think we've done that. Provide feedback and challenge. Difficult to do in a sense when the vast majority of the KPIs have been met and there's explanations being given for why the remainder haven't been met. So, do we agree that we have sought assurance and we're satisfied with the performance in terms of feedback and challenge? Is that agreed? Please indicate. Thank you. That's fine, thank you. Thanks for that, appreciate it. Okay, so if we move on to item 8. Okay, options for the future delivery of IMT services. John, Sophie are involved. So are you starting, Sophie, to introduce it and then John follow?
Chair, I'm not actually involved in this presentation. It's John who's delivering it.
Okay, John, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. If you could move to the next slide, please, Nigel. I promise not to read these slides out verbatim, but it does pay to just remind us that we're here to ask OSMB to consider the executive report attached in the papers pack on the future of IMT service delivery to determine whether the board supports those recommendations and to receive any additional comments you would like to make to be passed to the executive. It would be helpful to give you some context. So you've seen a previous report that fundamentally set the proposal that we remove IMT services from a bundle of services that included other back office services, reflecting the specialisation, if you like, of IMT services. And indeed, it went on to further propose that within IMT itself, that could be broken down into further into specialisms. You'll see as I go through these slides, indeed, that there was this potential to seek suppliers for up to 5 identified specialisms. I'm pleased to report that is somewhat simplified into a much more sort of streamlined package of procurement activity. The outsourcing of the following IT service to external suppliers. So it reminds us here that support desk operations, including end-user device management and managed cloud services and enhanced security services are the 2 key areas, specialisms, that we'd like to identify and proceed to procure as individual contractual and commercial containers. This will cause the insourcing of the following IT services, and that is an addition to the management activity we already undertake. This is referred to as SIAM, meaning Service Integration and Management. Some expansion of application support, reflecting that we can't find a viable market for those services because of the sort of peculiar and specialised nature of some of the softwares involved. VIP support. Those remaining technical operations that we still have in 2 years' time, reminding ourselves that we are trying to forecast what we will need in 2 years' time in a rapidly changing landscape of how IMT services are provided at the technical level and the effect that that's had in the market in terms of how these services are sort of supported. So we live in a very changing world that even had the Serco contract been able to be extended, we would have had to make fundamental changes to the IMT service in any case, really, in my view. Next slide, please, Nigel.
Just before you go on, just a message, 2 messages together. Streaming's now back online, and secondly, every member here has been sent the slides that John's talking about at the moment this morning. They're at top of people's inboxes on their devices, so if you want to use your iPads for that, that might help. Sorry about that, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt, but there are one or 2 hard copies if anybody requires them, if they haven't got the devices.
Thanks.
On this slide, effectively where we are today is the middle triangle. So that tries to say that we have Serco as our main single provider, providing the bulk of the IMT services. We do use other providers for certain specialisms, most notably in the networking and particularly wide area networking space where we work with the MPSN. And other services are provided today internally. And on the right-hand side, the target model where Serco becomes a number of providers, and as I've suggested, our view now is that that might be as few as 2, with some expansion of the services provided in-house by LCC. Next slide, please, Nigel. So what causes us to believe these changes are needed? We see a growing need to deliver agility. And reorganising ourselves and our services so that we can deliver change at a faster pace, reflecting that we are now no longer building complex infrastructures. We are essentially procuring services from the market. You will have heard the phrase cloud computing, where we can stand up these services very, very quickly, and the job changes to one more of configuration and programming. The market has changed in response to that. These cloud services are run by some of the tech mega vendors, and they are reshaping the market to suit their ends and how they want to address the market. And this is having a fundamental effect on the support services available to us in that market. And indeed, that agility needs to feed the Council's ambition to become increasingly a digital organisation so that we can deliver increasingly our services to our citizens in a digital manner where that is appropriate. Next slide, please, Nigel. The further, this is the breakdown. So this the colouring on this is the same as the triangle on the right, and it just explains further that where we identified those specialisms of service desk, end-use computing, local area network, Wi-Fi, and so forth, we actually now believe we can consolidate those into three main areas, one of which already exists. Of course, our relationship on the networking front does not sit inside this re-procurement, and we have built the options to include it as an option in the procurement and in the procurement we're currently running for wide area network. That basically leaves those two areas of service desk and end-use computing, and the second, managed cloud services with enhanced security operations. And on the right-hand side, there's some expansion in the services we're having to deliver internally. Nigel. The procurement has been simplified greatly, so the bottom box, wide area network, as I say, we are actually reviewing bids this week, and that is are working on a different timeline with an end of contract date of 2022, so that's sort of well underway. And the two areas that we're seeking approval to commence procurement are those two blocks, support desk and operations, and managed cloud and enhanced security services. In terms of managing that additional supplier, we're not starting from zero. We have good management skills inside the team. There are elements of service integration and management that we will need to acquire some of those skills that at the moment are delivered primarily by Serco, but not exclusively, so we're not starting from base zero. Nigel. The drivers for change. These are sort of, in effect, the external factors that cause us to seek to redesign IMT services. I think we've identified these over quite some long period of time. They're now becoming evident in the outside world, so other organisations have reacted in the same way, understanding the same things that our analysis has led us to believe. And we're seeing this increased pace of change, people utilising specialist technology expertise, as we see specialisms are very much how the market is working these days, and so on and so forth. On the right-hand side, also we are seeing this trend very much reflected in the procurement activities of similar organisations to ourselves, which gives, I think, now further assurance that we're not doing anything too exotic or imaginative here. We are sort of, it's very logical, and lots of people agree with us in terms of how we've analysed this. Nigel. In the subsequent to approval to move further with the disaggregation, if you like, of IMT from back office services, we did a soft market engagement, and I'm super delighted with the response from that. We really found no contraindicators that were serious, and the other detail, some of them played out there in those blue boxes, allowed us to then start to fine-tune our specification and the shape of the service that we seek to procure. That design process is ongoing, but we didn't really come across any fundamental blockers. They were already becoming very familiar with working in the way that we were suggesting, and in these multi-supplier arrangements are now more typical than not. So they are, we found no sort of significant blockers to the path that we like to take. Nigel. Furthermore, external assurance was sought by asking Gartner to review our proposal, and Gartner are very much a sort of specialist in this area. They analysed what we were doing, compared it to market trends, and basically played back that yes, we were reacting to the same drivers, and all organisations have seen this need for greater agility, and that required some reorganisation. And they also agreed that we were seeing quite a marked decline in these multi-year single-sourced prime provider arrangements. So assurance was sought that, in their view, we were, in all significant respects, seeking a model that was proven to be successful. Nigel. Some concerns were raised about this need to expand this service integration and management, so we did a bit of further work on that. I think we are these days, with the world has changed with recent events, and the skill shortage in the technology space is really quite marked. I think we are nowadays more concerned about our pure technical skill levels than we are about the management skill levels. But at the time, this was seen as the significant risk, and essentially it just says that we are not starting from zero, we are building on a foundation here. There will be people in scope of TUPE, we believe, who will further enhance that those skills from within Graham's team, and has a number of very talented people that hopefully will become available to us. And that the suppliers are increasingly aligned to work in this way, and a combination of traditional contractual requirements with collaboration agreements and new industrial practices are proving that this works reasonably well. We don't identify any significant risk in the need to do this service integration and management role going forward. Nigel. Migrating our service integration and management SIAM risk. So effectively, this slide just plays back that there are some mitigations, direct recruitment where needed, augmented by consultancy services should the need arise. I've mentioned the transfer of TUPE staff, and upskilling to some extent the existing staff is also an option. Nigel. There is nothing in this design that we believe will require us to have a step change in our budget. Notwithstanding external factors to this procurement, obviously we live in a world now of inflation and currency risk. All those things are not caused by this procurement. So in terms of that service redesign, our current belief is we can do this within the existing budget framework. Proof of the pudding obviously will only come out when we receive bids against our proposals in the event that this proposal is approved by the council. But as far as we can ascertain today, we do not see a significant request for a change in our budgetary position. This is a summary risk log for the programme. I won't read these out in detail, other than possibly point you to the highest one on this sheet that has limited mitigation. Is the third one down. Key existing Serco staff move to non-LCC account roles before contract end and date. We have to acknowledge there is limited mitigation options available to us, however, we are working with Graham. We have a great working relationship with Graham's team. We're almost sort of one team in effect on a day-to-day basis, and Graham's very supportive in trying to allay people's fears about natural fears about any change. I think the greater effect will just be that increased competition for staff in the market, rather than actually the requirement for us to re-procure these services. The others risks, you will see in the pack, have reasonable mitigations for them and don't cause us any undue concerns. And finally, the timeline. As you see, we are on track to complete contract formation in May, June in 2023. That gives us the glide path that the market informed us was the most sensible of 6 to 9 months, and indeed we are padding that somewhat because we want to get this right. Whilst I can't promise you we won't see a single migration issue, we are very confident we can contain these issues and manage the complexity by doing some work up front, some tooling work up front, changing and adjusting some processes, and Graham is being extremely supportive in the need to do some of these things. We're working together to sort of create win-win situations where we can do as much work as possible before any kind of big bang effect that could arise if we did absolutely nothing until the end of March in 2024. Nigel. So, in effect, you have seen the basic proposal before. This adds, fine-tunes it somewhat and adds, I hope, additional assurance that the analysis has supported the fundamentals of that outline plan that you saw last year. And we're asking the executive to add any comments and recommendations to this report for the executive. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, questions? Anybody want to ask a question? I mean, this is pretty important. It's going to the executive. The executive are expecting us to have done our work as scrutiny committees, as a scrutiny committee. So we are there to provide not only support, but also challenge. So, what do we think, Jackie?
Thank you, Chairman. It's lovely to see you back, and I must tell you that your Vice Chairman did you proud when you were away. Okay. John, thank you very much for your report. This is a slightly sideways question, but it is relevant. When you took on your post, you took on a considerable mess, and the progress has been significant. Okay. Certainly from an end user perspective, so thank you for that. One of the problems that you highlighted when you first came along was that numerous departments within the council were procuring software and hardware without relating to each other, without relating to the council as a whole. And in some cases, those devices and those programs were actually fighting against each other and doing damage. I can remember having the conversation with you. And now that we're moving further on into a new overall procurement, can you tell me what sort of progress you've made to solve that particular issue, to create a cohesive use of IMT throughout the council? And how will you keep an eye on that going forward into this new system, please? Thank you.
It's worth reminding ourselves there are probably three principal problems with not providing good governance, and some of them improve actually just with the changing landscape. And those three reasons are: one is just effective use of cash. You're not sort of buying things several times that you could reuse, and so on and so forth. The other is our responsibilities to manage data under GDPR, and the use of the .gov.uk namespace comes with a number of mandatory requirements, and perhaps the third is that will it all work technically? On the third, the technical problems caused by people sort of, if you like, having sort of departmental type projects and those kinds of more casual procurements is getting easier because they tend to be buying cloud services, and you know, it's not as if you're trying to get them working in a technical environment that you've had to build and protect and do the security for. The cloud services are fundamentally engineered in a way that tends to make them safe, tends to make them stable, and so forth. However, some people take that as a license, as almost a green light to buy these services. However, we still have our GDPR responsibilities. We still have the responsibility to use money effectively. And it causes IMT work sometimes in the sense, if someone gets to a certain platform, somebody buys something like a project management service, then other people in the council want to use that. We go to buy that service and we find administration for that service sits somewhere out in the department with an individual who first got there with his credit card. And we have to take control of that environment. We have to establish that we are the proper authority, and so on and so forth. So the problems are getting less, but they still exist. I don't naturally want to be a control freak on everything, but I do think it is in LCC's interest for this organisation, somewhat stronger governance rather than a very laissez-faire attitude to these things. I still think is beneficial to this organisation.
Thank you very much. Is there anything that we need to do to strengthen your hand there? Because if it's still happening, there is always a risk, even if it's one or two people buying off-piste, as it were. So is there anything we need to do within the governance to strengthen your position with regard to this?
I've recently come under Andrew as my Executive Director, and this is a subject that we've already talked about, even in our first couple of hours. I don't want to sort of preempt the outcomes of those conversations, but I do believe that what you're alluding to chimes with my understanding of where I'm being asked to take the service. So perhaps we can come back to you with more evolved thinking on that.
I think that's an important point, Jackie, because if there is still should we say, work going on, commissioning work going on in departments, then I think that we've said as a council before that we wanted to see it concentrated. So at some point, I think that we would welcome a report back to OSMB, particularly as soon as possible, particularly before we get too far in the service integration and management. So can we get that done?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Sorry, who was Councillor Marfleet? Yep, Councillor Marfleet.
Thank you, morning Chairman, and nice to see you back as well. A lot of that, I mean, I think looks really good, and you know, sort of support it. The only sort of area I was starting to sort of question is that we seem to be we're getting bits of Serco contracts sort of like taken apart from the whole sort of, unless it's just me, this might be my sort of take on it, but it's like we're sort of getting certain chunks of the Serco contracts which are being sort of revamped, procurement, etc. And we're not necessarily getting the bigger whole picture. And like, so this is a sort of a move away, isn't it? A sort of re-procurement, bringing some of it back in-house and going some of it for specialist services, procurement providers. And yet, and I'm sort of seeing adults, we need certain bits that sort of need to break away and come in-house, and some bits to go out to specialist providers. And I just wonder whether really, are we going to keep doing it sort of like a coming to our overview, like a bit sort of here and a bit there, or are we going to have a bit of an overview of really what you want to do all in all, rather than just sort of keep bringing certain bits like this bit?
Can Andrew comment?
Well, we've got Sophie online. It might just be worth bringing her in if she's there, just to give a bit of an overview of the overall corporate services re-procurement, because it'll seek to answer some of your questions, Councillor Marfleet, I think.
Sophie.
Hi, Councillor Marfleet. Was your question around IMT, or was it around the broader services?
It's more really, I mean, this is about IMT, but this is another piece that's come to us, and the whole sort of, it's like you're going to break, it's like becoming a jigsaw puzzle for the whole Serco contract, and we're on a sort of a road in the next few years about sort of looking at the whole contract, and it seems like we're getting little bits of the jigsaw at various committees as we go on this journey, and it'd be quite nice to sort of, or is that how we're going to do it? Just break it down into jigsaw pieces, or is there going to be a bigger picture of, or are we too early?
I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, too early. So IMT, we started the work on IMT sooner than we did on the other services. So that was the finance, the HR and the customer service centre. And we always intended to run them on two different timelines, because we thought that the IMT would involve quite complex procurement and probably high volumes of procurement. In fact, the work we've done with the market suggests that it's probably not quite as complex as we thought it was going to be. But that was the reason why we started it earlier than the other service streams. In fact, and the intention was that those other service streams, we would do the work on those, and we would do it so that we had a view of where we were on those areas at the back end of the summer. So at the beginning of the autumn, we would have a clear view to bring that to you. And it was motivated by the need to crack on first with the IMT. So we didn't run out of time during the transition period. In fact, we've managed to bring forward the other work by 3 months. And as a result of that, we're going to be bringing you the recommendations next month for those other services. And there are recommendations in that report. It's not been through the full internal informal process yet, so there could be changes to those recommendations, but we will be bringing you back a full options appraisal next month on that. And I think it's fair to say that we've applied a set of principles as to when it makes sense to insource, when it makes sense to outsource, what the alternative options might be, because they do vary in relation to the different services. and we'll be bringing that back to you next month. Does that help? So you will have a full picture by the 27th, is it the 26th of May, I think?
No, that makes sense. Thank you. So,
thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Yeah, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. And as everyone said before, it's good to see you back in your rightful place. John, one question, sort of concern I have is the issue around security of a platform that's based on the cloud and parts that are outsourced, parts that are in-source. How are we ensuring that this new contractual system that we're going to put in place for IMT is as secure as it can be?
It's pretty much the only future for us. I think in terms of continuing to run our own infrastructure and within what is a small budget in the big scheme of things, we just can't keep up with the bad guys. We would have to keep spending more and more money on security, whereas your Amazons, your Microsoft, your Googles spend mind-boggling sums on protecting their brand. Let's be honest, they're not, it's not entirely just about the interests of their customers, it's in their own interests. You'll all be familiar with the term zero-day attack. It used to be popular a few years ago. We're now, 24 hours now is way, way too long to respond. You have to respond in minutes, and they are now getting response times of 8 minutes and 10 minutes. We will never be able to get anywhere close. So it's unfortunately safety in numbers. It's staying behind those big investments in state-of-the-art security. They detect problems, react to problems much more quickly than any individual organisation, however large, could really. It's a sad world, but that's the reality. And indeed, the cyber war is raging at the moment. It has never been as bad as it is right now, and these systems are proving pretty robust. They have been attacked mercilessly over the last few weeks, and very few major outages outside of British Airways and individual corporate systems, but these big cloud systems so far, they've withstood the assault.
Any more? Councillor Dilks, Phil?
You're very kind, and I subscribe to the comments saying welcome back, Rob. Thanks for the presentation. I'm not a technical person, so it was way above me in most of it, but I understood the principles. I know the principles that we've adopted, when we want to sort of move forward on these things, are listed there. But I would like to hear a bit more, if we could, about the sort of protection of the systems, as we move forward. Technology, as we know, is wonderful when it works, but it's about the protection of it when it doesn't work, and the cyber attacks that you mentioned. That there are always people out there, as we know, that want to cause us trouble. So it's really, some reassurance, if I can, on the backup plans when it all goes wrong. Thank you.
It's always a challenge when someone wants an answer on security but not technical. So there's a certain challenge to that. However, for instance, an example of one of the key ways in which this works will be that. You've heard about the MDM program, the device management program, moving our device management to these clouds. A later phase of this work, and it is a many-phased thing, will be changing the agents. It's much more than just antivirus these days. These agents will check, is it really you doing that on the computer? Does it look risky? And it will be reporting in real time back to a security operations center, which is one of these global setups. And if they suddenly see something across the world in numbers, they identify it as new and different, they analyze it, work out, and may even be able to send instructions to the agent to stop it operating, nip it out. And they can do that really quite quickly. So it's that sort of the real-time interactivity of security systems and the way they join up is part of that assurance. No one can guarantee you we won't get hit again. All we can do is all we can do, as it were. But this is very much where we need to be at that sort of enterprise standard of security to resist the sort of attacks that we will be subject to.
Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman, and I too would like to say it's great to see you back. My question is on slide 11, there's reference to recruitment and retention under mitigating our service integration and management risks. I was just wondering, it's probably a difficult question really in a way that to quantify the answer. It says direct recruitment supplemented where necessary with consultancy services. I was going to say, what degree of confidence do you have that that's going to be met? I suppose it's probably how long is a piece of string, but I was just wondering the sort of confidence level on achieving that. Thank you, Chairman.
I would say reasonable confidence, actually. As I say, we are somewhat more concerned about the technical specialisms, even though it is a problem that will reduce itself, as you will see less and less what I would call those high-end technical engineers working around this account. Those people will be working in those cloud services, and really the only engineering at a high level being done for the council will be in our sort of access networks and our wireless networks. Those big infrastructures will be deconstructed over the coming years. People like me will disappear. Your IMT service will probably contract considerably and just become much less about physical engineering and more about configuration, programming and building business solutions. IMT is going to look very, very different in even 4 to 5 years. But specifically on the SIAM thing, we were wary of it at first because it was new. I do apologise, turning away from the microphone. We were wary of it at first because it was new, but in the analysis, what we learned was we were doing most of it already. It was part of how we worked with Serco to make significant improvements over the last few years. They were all SIAM techniques, really, that made the difference.
Just following on from that, you mentioned that it seems as though there may only be 2 providers. Or you mentioned at least that's in a context. I mean, one of the things that I got the impression of was that we would extend our in-house work and we would not have one supplier. We would go out to the market, and it's pointed out that we have commercial levers to get the best out of each supplier, which suggests multiple suppliers. But when you were giving your presentation, you mentioned only 2 suppliers. How does those 2 things fit together?
So working with that sort of design concept of seeking specialists for these very specialist areas, what we found was these specialisms tended to come in combination within support organisations. So happily, in the software market test, we found multiple examples of organisations who could deliver on more than one bullet point. And they did sort of collect very nicely into combining the need for device management, support desk, and sort of device security. That we could find combinations of services that really ticked all the boxes, or they could build subcontracts into the big tech vendors who tend not to deal direct with organisations like LCC. And then on the other side, it is a truism that effectively we are consuming, you may have heard of Microsoft Azure services, where we're moving all our services into Microsoft Azure hosting, and that was work was completed just pre to Christmas. But those environments have millions of subscribers. They are identical for all of those subscribers. The care and feeding of that environment is the same wherever you are in the world. These are global scale systems. And the only uniqueness about it is where we are sort of running odd bits of software, doing precise pieces of configuration. But increasingly, we have these phrases, infrastructure of a service, where we basically take the classic concept of a server and lots of software and putting that in someone else's data center to actually just buying the software and not even having to sort of maintain the software. We consume the software as a service. And so it's a reducing footprint of that specialized support. And we are seeing both Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all working with key partners to protect their brand, to build the right care and feeding, the right support services for the people like us subscribing to those services. So we're seeing this sort of almost homologization of the market into these key technical organisations. Does that answer your question, Chair?
To an extent, but I just wondered, we've now got to a situation where we probably want to go out to the market on a number of different areas. If we were to go out to the market for example, on a particular aspect and found that one of the two big suppliers wasn't as good at a particular area, then how do we build a package then? Because it seems as though the people that have monopolised the market have perhaps done so because of their efficiencies between different areas of IT work that we need. And I'm just wondering how we can actually get the very best out of for each section.
Indeed, in this paper, we haven't actually committed to trying to do this with 3 suppliers. So taking the WAN, LAN and Wi-Fi as one that's been around for a long time, our association with EMPSN, that would be an expansion to the LAN and Wi-Fi. They currently only look after the wide area network, and Serco look after the LAN and Wi-Fi, and indeed they subcontract some of that to other organisations. Some of whom are amongst the list of people you know that turn up when you search the market in this way. But we haven't closed the door to that, Mr. Chair. If indeed in the procurement exercise we create options and we are careful how we structure those options, it would be possible for somebody to bid for one specialisation but not be penalised for not bidding for the other specialisations. We are looking to design the procurement exercise to keep the doors open should it prove in our interest to carve out one of those specialisations and procure it independently.
Okay.
Sophie might say that's somewhat more challenging than I make it sound, but I'm sure she'll make it. She'll find an answer to that. I'm not denying it has some complexity in terms of procurement, but it's worth the effort.
Okay. And my other question is that we have we know that the in-house SIAM needs suitably skilled and experienced resources. Okay, how are we going to get those in what is a competitive market within the restrictions imposed by local authority wage settlements?
If everybody who works on this account today was available to me in 2024, I'll be a happy man, and we would be in a good shape. It will be creating a new senior management sort of capability inside IMT, and we have a combination of options. So we have people who already work on the account but work for Serco, who may choose to move with the account. Graham, I'm sure, might be able to find good use for them inside Serco. So, you know, there is some competition for those skills. We have contractors working for IMT today who have these skills. And in conversations with agencies, the management skills seem to be easier to find. Not easy, but easier. And I think talking to other CTOs, whilst we can't always compete in raw cash terms, people still want to work for the public sector. People still are invested in the ethos of what we do, and also, you know, if you're patient and you really work the recruitment process, you do eventually find good people. Not everybody is just driven by pure salary level, I can't say there won't be challenges, Chair. That would be misleading, but it's not keeping me up at night. I'm not. No, I don't.
Well, anybody else want to ask any questions? Tom, again. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've sort of already alluded to, John, there may be an instance where multiple providers are used rather than, say, one or two. You've got, say, 3 or 4 because they've only applied for one part, but they're specialists. What would be the governance impact on that? Because obviously, if they've only applied for one section, you've got 3 or 4 various providers. Are you going to have 3 or 4 different governance arrangements, which, of course, you as officers will have to go through? We'd have to scrutinise as a body as well. And what would be the impact of that? Would it be a concern or a pressure on time? Would you think that wouldn't be a problem because you could frame things in such a way that it would be quite straightforward to do that?
You allude to the answer. So the business of SIAM is to make it appear to the organisation as one pane of glass. It is one IMT service, all the same processes just sit in different swim lanes, and you just worry about relationships between the swim lanes. And SIAM is really the design of processes in that way. So this is we are doing nothing new here. This is well-established practice.
Any more? If I could come back to one other point. Again, on this SIAM page of the presentation, it said that we can, through SIAM, enable ourselves to use commercial levers to get the best out of each supplier. I just wonder if you could say something more about the commercial levers that we've got, and also about, and it comes back to this commissioning from multiple providers. I'm still interested in knowing about the range of multiple providers that we're thinking about, from 2 providers on the one hand to multiple providers, if we don't go for what we might call the condensed model, but we do spread the work that we have to do across multiple providers. So what is you mentioned 2, and then just when you were answering the last question, you mentioned three major providers. What's the range?
On balance of probability, if it's not 3, it would, on balance of probability, be 4. I would be very, very surprised if we pushed it as far as 5 different suppliers. Partly because you know there are more people to manage and and so on and so forth. In terms of governance and assuring their performance, obviously carrots and sticks. The sticks are pretty classical. But the good thing about cloud services is you have data on just about everything. So every time something moves, you generate an item of data and you can then analyse and record. So the tracking of things like SLAs and KPIs becomes automated pretty much. We would probably expand upon the SLAs and KPIs we operate today because of that capability and just make them a bit more granular. They would be presented to the council as a whole. As I said, you know, this is the IMT service and how the IMT service is performing. But within those, the responsibilities of these suppliers will be clearly understood and measured. So yes, in fact, it probably will improve our sort of measurement of performance. I would imagine.
Final go. Anybody else want to ask a question? Any of the officers? Yeah. Want to contribute? No. Okay. So, Councillor Boutroy.
It wasn't so much a question. It was more just to pick up on the recruitment possible difficulties. Something that we've been looking at pretty stringently with Andrew and HR, and there are things that we can do to help where we do have difficult areas to recruit to. So it is something that we are wary of, and there are some tools there that we can put in place if we did need to do that. So just a little bit more reassurance really around that recruitment.
We are a scrutiny committee, so can you tell us a bit more about there are various proposals that we could put in place?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I should have just kept quiet, shouldn't I? No. I mean, there are sort of payments that can be made, short-term payments that can be made to attract people. Whether or not with IT, there are certain packages with around cars and things like that that can potentially be put in place. So there are things that we have been looking at and working through at the moment to make sure that we can attract the very best people to the council. I think we've touched on, certainly with IT, remote working and things like that is certainly something that works and puts us on more of a level playing field with other people, especially with the benefits of living in Lincolnshire and lower house costs and things like that. They all work, because if you're not wanting to relocate, or I mean, I think, Martin, there are relocation packages as well, aren't there? And I know Andrew's nodding his head, that we can look at as well. So there are definitely things and tools there that we can do.
Okay, fine. Just to come back, anybody else want to raise anything? No.
Very brief.
Yeah.
Just to ask Councillor Boutroy a question. If, because obviously local government, your wage is determined by local government pay scale, but if they're a contractor, are they still governed by that? Because they're not technically employed by they're not a local government, they're not paying into the pension scheme, they are a contractor. So is that a way round of that pay restraint?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if procurement goes out and for example, Serco wants to pay a certain rate for that position, then they're free to do that. That's within their commercial, area that they can pay so much the going rate, really. I mean, Councillor Parker alluded to some of the restrictions that we have, but that is certainly, I suppose, one of the ways that we can get around that.
Okay. Is that okay, Tom?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, right. Unless there's any more questions, could we have a look at page 19 in relation to the options for the future of IMT services? The actions that are required are: 1, for us to consider the attached report, which we've done, and to determine whether the board supports the recommendations of the executive as set out in the report, and secondly, agree any additional comments to be passed on. Well, those have been captured by a Democratic Services Officer. So do we support the recommendation to the executive as set out in the report? All those in favour? Thank you. Any abstentions or opposition? No. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thank you, Sophie, as well. Okay, so we've now dealt with item 8. Excuse me. Move on to item 9, the award to reseller for provision of Microsoft subscriptions agreements, which is on page 57. Right, I'm just looking at the presentation of that. Yeah, Paul. Yep. Paul's online.
Yep. Good morning, Chair.
Yep, that's Paul Everstone.
In this report, OSMB is being asked to consider a report that's going to the executive and determine whether the board supports the recommendations to the executive as set out in that report. And also to agree any additional comments that they wish to pass on to the executive. So the report itself sets out and seeks approval for the proposed procurement route for the provision of Microsoft software and services, and recommends that the executive approves the direct award of a 1-year contract via Crown Commercial Services RM 6194 back office software framework to the incumbent reseller Softcat. The report then goes on to consider alternative courses of action, including awarding via the existing software contract and the do nothing option, and gives the reasons why these have been discounted. The report goes on to explain the background to the current situation, which is that Microsoft contracts are usually in 3-year cycles sold through resellers. Our current reseller contract is due to end on the 30th of June, and it consists of 2 parts. There's an enterprise subscription agreement that's worth about £1.16 million annually, and a server cloud enrolment worth about £145,000 annually. LCC's licensing level is supported by Serco Software Asset Management. The Serco contract itself, as we've just been discussing in the previous item, is due to end in March 2024. And any future software reseller agreement needs to fit strategically with the Council's longer-term requirements. The pricing of Microsoft software is via a Crown Commercial Service framework and is controlled by a government memorandum of understanding, which means there's little difference on price between Microsoft resellers. The COVID pandemic resulted in increasing network and security demands due to working from home. And consequently, LCC decided to migrate from Microsoft's E3 subscriptions to an E5 subscription, which enabled us to take advantage of some enhanced facilities. In order to do this, we agreed a ramp pricing agreement with Microsoft that meant we benefited from a tapered discount over 3 years. But this means the 3-year agreement now extends beyond the Softcat reseller agreement by 12 months. And therefore, we need to have a short-term reseller contract in place to cover the period until the next 3-year licensing cycle. The recommended back-office software framework allows the council to do this via a direct award to the incumbent reseller. So the conclusion of the report is that under the circumstances, this is a pragmatic solution that offers a regulatory compliant route to market, gives us the continued benefit of the final year of the ramp, and provides licensing cover whilst we engage on the strategically relevant procurement competition for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Questions? Anybody want to ask a question about the re-award, as it were, to the reseller for provision of Microsoft subscriptions? No? Could I just look at alternative 1, which is on page 59? The process via the existing contracts, this alternative should be discounted. It will not be possible to complete the order process before the existing contract expires. I just wondered if you could say, Paul, why not? And if we'd have started earlier, recognising the problems that you've set out, could we have continued the Microsoft 2022-23 subscription through the existing contract?
As it turned out, no. Quarters was that because the E5 subscriptions themselves are more expensive than the E3s, then the total value that we were spending under the existing contract exceeded the allowance that is built into the framework for increased value of the contract. So unfortunately, we were not able to use that route. Otherwise, that would have been the preferred route, to be honest.
Okay, fine. Yep, John.
Might be helpful if I give you a slightly less technical definition of what happened here. We had the opportunity to grab a discount at the outbreak of COVID, which was the opportunity for that discount was rapidly taken out of the market when demand snowballed as everyone needed to do what we were doing. But we got in so quick that we locked that in for 3 years. And what you're seeing here is us loath to give away an extra 1 year's worth of discount, which is of some considerable value to the council. But by jumping on that discount to deal with COVID, we had already used the headroom in the existing contract. So whilst there is in technically time that we could put this 1 year deal together so that all these contracts become coterminous, allowing us to get a better deal in 1 year's time, this is just a technical compliant way of bridging that year, not giving back the discount, but also not breaching the headroom of the current Softcat contract. I think it's quite convoluted, but for the best of intentions.
Convoluted, but does that mean we've saved some money?
Yes.
And how much?
I don't have the figures to hand. My estimate would be about 150,000, Paul.
Okay.
Again, I don't have the figures to hand, but yes, it was probably be something in that sort of region, yes.
Well, that's reassuring, isn't it? Okay, so what we've got is that a recommendation that to go to the executive approves the direct award of the contract. We've considered the report, and do we support the recommendations the executive has set out in the report? That's the first thing. Can we vote on that? Is there a proposer and a seconder? Proposer and a seconder? Yeah. Councillor Strengle and Councillor Pepper, in that order. So we're now voting on that part of it. Okay, those in favour? Thank you. Comments have been captured that this is a good idea. Do nothing is not an option, and we can't process it through the existing contract, and we're saving approximately £150,000, which should be okay. So I'll pass on. those comments to the executive. Okay. Is that okay? Right. So we move on now, excuse me, to item 10, which is the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report. This item sets out the annual report for Overview and Scrutiny. Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services, will present the report. Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as you say, this report gives the board an opportunity to consider the draft Overview and Scrutiny annual report for the last council year. The board's invited to consider the draft before a final version is put before annual council meeting on the 20th of May. The annual report attached to the pack, starting at page 67, focuses on the achievements of scrutiny in 2021-22, and we've used, I think it's been preferred for us to use the infographics to illustrate some of the statistics in there, and through those infographics you'll see an increase in the number of non-executive councillors who have engaged in scrutiny since the new council was elected in May 2021. It's gone up from 78% to 92%, which is a positive thing, I believe. Included in the foreword on page 68, you'll see a list of some of the achievements of scrutiny over the period. And throughout the report, there are contributions from the various committees, as well as corporate parenting panel and scrutiny panels A and B. So if I can return to the recommendations in the covering report, Chairman, the board are invited to consider and comment on the draft report for 2021-22 and agree the submission of the report with or without amendment to the annual meeting of the County Council on the 20th of May for final approval. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, we've got a lot of chairs of committees, of scrutiny committees here, so could I say thank you for all the work that's gone on in contributing to this report, and invite questions and comments, please. Jackie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very, very much for the report. It's very encouraging, actually. We've got 92% of councillors, non-executive councillors, taking part in scrutiny, but obviously the ideal is that it should be 100%. So we perhaps need to look at why the other 8% is not involved. Is there any barrier to their involvement, or is, they're either at the council end or at their own end? And is there any way of facilitating 100% involvement for non-executive councillors in this process? Would you be in agreement with that, Chairman?
Definitely. The calculation and which councillors are excluded. I take it the executive members are excluded.
Yes, executive councillors can't take part in scrutiny, so that's 9 councillors of the 70 already excluded, but we're talking about a percentage of non-executive councillors here. So there are a number of councillors who are involved in other committees like planning committee and audit committee. They're not precluded from taking part in scrutiny, but they are busy doing the other work on regulatory committees, for instance. It may be a pressure of time, for instance, but it's something we can look at, and we can bring those figures back to you.
Okay. Yes.
Councillor Strangle obviously has a vested interest in mentioning pensions as well. Yeah.
Right. Any further comments? Okay. I've got one, and that's about the engagement of people from with specialist interests and knowledge from sectors where we are looking at their work. And I noticed that on page 69 it talks about the involvement of governors, church representative, councillors from the district council, representatives from other local organisations. And that role of our engagement with other people to come to scrutiny committees, for example, we don't usually have very many people at OSMB from outside our world. Usually it's contractors and suppliers, but we could think of whether or not other people from different organisations, including councils and other local organisations, and that applies to all the scrutiny committees, I suppose. And I just wonder what we think about that engagement, not just in what we might call the specialist panels that have been set up, the one to do with town centres and the other to do with the agricultural sector, because that does really engage. And I wondered what we think about the idea of more engagement with outside organisations. Yeah, Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think that's something that in Children and Young People's Committee we do try and encourage to get outside people in. It reinforces the topic, and it makes it very real if we get, for example, a head teacher or somebody from one of the outside bodies that we deal with, such as the police or other organisations. And I think it brings to life the reports that we have in front of us. I think it makes them more real, and I think we do have an appetite for that in children and young people. Thanks, Chairman.
Any more comments from chairs of scrutiny committees? Well, at least can we go away and think about it, if nothing else? Okay. So, we've got the overview and scrutiny report in front of us. If there's no other comments, consider and comment on the draft overview and scrutiny annual report, which we've done, and agree the submission with or without amendment to the annual meeting of the County Council on the 20th of May. I take it from that there's been nobody wants to move an amendment to anything that's in here at the moment. So could I have a proposer and seconder? Jackie, thank you. Councillor Strangle, thank you. Okay, all those in favour? Any against? No, thanks, that's carried. I look forward to contributions at full council meeting about the work that we do, because I think that's a wider forum, as it were, for us to talk about our own work. Right, item 11. Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, our work programme set out before us. What we're asked to do is to determine whether we're satisfied. Sorry.
It's the two committees, Chairman.
Children and young people. Yeah. Children and young people programmes and the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. So, Rob.
Thanks, Chairman. The committee met actually last Friday, where it considered the items set out on pages 87 to 88 of the agenda we have. The committee recorded its unanimous support for the 3 pre-decision scrutiny items, and comments from the discussions will be passed on to the Executive and Councillor Mrs Bradwell. We also heard from the Independent Chair and Business Manager for the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership on its work over the past year to safeguard and promote the welfare of children and young people in Lincolnshire, and also the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner and a representative from the NHS Clinical Commissioning Group were also in attendance. So the representing police and health, who along with the council are statutory partners of the LSCP, and were allowed to participate in the item, as I alluded to earlier. After a lengthy debate with a lot of challenge, and it was a considerable debate, and it was very interesting. A lot of challenge was actually provided to the LSCP's Independent Chair and Business Manager, and the committee was assured of the work being undertaken by the LSCP and looks forward to receiving a further update in April 2023. And I should perhaps add, I happened to meet one of the outside representatives at a subsequent meeting, and they did comment on how impressed they were with the depth of questioning that we had at the meeting, and I thought that was reassuring, that they felt they were given a fair hearing, but also a thorough investigation, shall we say, of the matter. It was also reported at the last meeting by the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, Community Safety and Procurement, and the Executive Director of Children's Services, that the final letter had been received that very morning from Ofsted, setting out its findings following the recent focused visit to Children's Services. And I'm very pleased to report that the letter was extremely positive and highlighted that children are supported highly effectively to make good progress, and strong relationship-based social work practice underpins all of the local authority services. So that was a very positive start to our meeting last week. The committee's future work programme is, as I mentioned, set out pages 88 to 91, but I do have a couple of changes to report. The pre-decision scrutiny report on the new children's residential home in Louth, listed for the meeting on the 22nd of July, is confirmed and will now be an exempt decision by the leader between the 1st and 22nd of September. The pre-decision scrutiny report on the recommissioning of children with disabilities services has actually been deferred from the 21st of October meeting to the January 2023 meeting. And lastly, at the end of March, the government published the SEND Green Paper and the Education White Paper. And an overview of the SEND Green Paper, which is a consultation document, will be considered at the next meeting of the committee on the 17th of June to advise members of the content of the consultation. And an overview of the Education White Paper will be considered at the meeting on the 22nd of July, again to advise members on the intentions of the White Paper, and along with reports on educational attainment in Lincolnshire schools and education investment areas, this will provide an education theme for most of the July agenda, which will enable the committee to delve in this area in more details. We do try and pick up on current issues that are coming forward out of government, and make sure our members on the committee are fully informed of new developments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any comments or questions to Rob about the report that you've just received? No. Okay. Over to you, Nigel, on public protection and communities.
Thank you. I think all members spoken so far have said welcome back, Rob, and it would be remiss of me not to do so too. So welcome back.
Thank you.
And I think the volume of comments just goes to show how valued you actually are. Thank you. So what members have in front of them on agenda item 11 is a detailed account of items already taken in the meetings, following my last update to you in January 2022. I'll take the report as read. However, I would like to mention some key areas of work undertaken in the last two meetings conducted. In the March meeting, we received a comprehensive annual update from Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership, on which the committee had a fruitful debate in relation to speed issues caused by motorists not abiding by speed limits. And we're pleased to hear that the introduction of the Safer Road team within Lincolnshire Police would hopefully help alleviate some of these problems in our local communities. We also discussed collisions and road traffic accidents from the scope of communication campaigns through various media outlets to ensure that messages were actively promoted to the public. In line with this, we also touched upon the topic of use of protective cycling and walking equipment, which was actively promoted within schools and through newsletters. In the same meeting, we received an annual update on Prevent, which is our counter-terrorism prevention programme, that informed the committee of work being carried out across the county with third sector organisations to deliver a wide range of projects that aim at protecting our children and young persons and all residents from radicalisation and from threats to their welfare. We dedicated our debate in discussing concerns raised about extreme right-wing influences on school-aged children, and received assurance that teachers receive specialist training to remain alert to any threats. We also heard about women's engagement events taking place across the county to raise awareness of Prevent. Moving on, in our last meeting on the 19th of April, we received a report in relation to volunteering in Lincolnshire, and were updated on how COVID has affected the voluntary sector in the county. A report on the current picture about avian flu across the county and how cases are being tackled. Also, a report on the outcomes of Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Services review of Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, and agreed for a further report to be added onto the work programme in regards to actions taken to mitigate concerns and address recommendations. Lastly, the committee was reassured around the arrangements established by Lincolnshire County Council, Lincolnshire's district councils and multi-agency partners to deliver the government requirements in relation to the Ukraine humanitarian crisis. And we requested that a further update is submitted to the committee in 6 months' time. Looking forward to the future work of the programme, there have been some additional items made to the work programme since the publication of this agenda. The Trading Standards Annual Review and the Stay Safe Update Report in September 2022. Reducing offending, the work of the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership will be in the December 2022 agenda. An update in the food sector by trading standards, an update from the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership in January 2023. Really moving on now. Lastly, in March 2023, we will receive the next annual Prevent report and a report on substance misuse. You'll also see that we have some potential items to be added on the back of the work programme, which are the Safer Together update, community trigger strategy, antisocial behaviour, and sources of intelligence used by trading standards. Chairman, this concludes my update to you and members of this board, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Perhaps you could say a word in relation to the last meeting and say a bit more about the inspection outcomes of the fire service review. You mentioned, were there any concerns raised, and if so, what were they?
No real concerns, Chairman. Overall, the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue was related as good, which is about the same as most other fire and rescue services in the country. There's only one, I think it was Merseyside, who actually got an outstanding. That's the next grade up from good. So I think we're content on where we are, but we really are looking to improve on all those goods. When compared with, say, nearby counties such as Cambridgeshire, they'd actually moved forward far more than Lincolnshire had. And that was pointed out to the Chief Fire Officer, and I know the Executive Councillor has taken this on board, and I nudged shoulders with the SD, and we're looking to improve that. And I understand from her an interim letter had been sent only this last week, which was a positive outcome. So we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions to either Rob or Nigel? Okay, could I just go back, Rob, to the Children's Services meeting, which I did attend. There was some serious discussion about holiday activities and the food programme, and also the Church of England school at Sutterton, and something about Welton developer contribution. Do you briefly want to say something about those items to update the members of OSMB?
Yes, certainly. The food programme is a government-sponsored scheme that is designed to provide activities and meals for children, mainly those who are on free school meals during the holidays. So it's funded through a government grant, if I'm right in thinking on that. And so that scheme is one that will be coming into play, obviously, in the summer holidays. And the other one was?
Well, there was Welton School. Yeah.
That's I think that's an exempt item. Yeah, I think that was an exempt item, if I remember rightly. Yeah.
And what was the other one? Sorry? Yeah. Sorry, what was it again? Do you want to...
It was the Four Fields School in Sutterton, the other decision.
Oh yes, that was well received. I think what I can recall is a positive development there. It's the idea is to make sure we have the sufficient numbers across the county, and one school isn't disadvantaged by another school having a massive oversubscription. So it's the idea is to make sure that we have sufficient places across the county and provision is suitable, particularly obviously in the case of special schools, which is why there's a lot of upgrading going on, and I think there's a official opening, I think it's at the end of next month, beginning of next month, for one of the schools at Bourne. So there's a lot of work going on that in terms of upgrading and providing good provision in these SEND schools.
Fine. Any further questions? Yeah, Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I waited because it's not to either of the chairmen that have given their reports today. Very thankful. And can I just say thank you to Councillor Pepper and all those that arranged the visit that we had yesterday. It was really, I'd never been to the fire training facility that we've got, which is a great facility, I've learned, and we also went to the emergency centre on South Park, which was, equally eye-opening. So I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure others did too, so thank you. My sort of question, though, if I may, was on, I'm aware that there's no report today on our agenda from the Highways Scrutiny Committee, of course, but I am aware of the press reports, after this week's meeting. There was a meeting on Monday, I believe, of the Highways Scrutiny Committee where there were introducing major changes were introduced, frankly, or restricting street lighting to effectively remove highway lighting from new developments in the future. And obviously, that's quite a fundamental sort of potential change that's coming, and I note it's going to the executive at their next meeting. But I just wondered, is it appropriate for that sort of thing to come to a meeting of OSMB at some stage? Thank you.
It's not on the agenda for this particular meeting. Okay, it was children and young people and public protection. So being reasonable about it, that's for a discussion to take place outside of the meeting if you want to, with officers about seeing a discussion to be had about the street lighting issue, either to go to either back onto the agenda for highways or perhaps for a discussion to take place at the next full council meeting. But it isn't for this OSMB. So Councillor Hill, I don't know if you want to comment at all about the way that could be tackled.
Well, I mean, it's really up to the scrutiny system to decide for itself, isn't it? And then inform the executive, in my view.
Okay, but this isn't the appropriate scrutiny committee.
Yeah, no, it isn't. No, I don't.
To deal with this. So I suggest that you talk outside this meeting to the relevant scrutiny committee chair. Thank you. But thanks for raising it anyway. Okay, what we're here to do to determine whether we're satisfied with the activity undertaken by the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee and the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. And also to say whether we're happy with or satisfied with the planned work programme of both those committees. Proposer and a seconder? Yeah, Tom? Seconder? Jackie? Thank you. Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? No. Okay, and the final item on the agenda is for noting, which is paper 12, excuse me. Yeah, agenda item 12. This item informs the board of its current work programme and is for information only. Okay. Thank you everybody for your attendance. Nice to be back. Nice to hear people say some nice things. And I'm sure that you didn't miss me very much because I'm sure Tom did a great job during my absence. Okay, declare the meeting closed.